So good afternoon. Thank you for attending the 2021 Roundtable meeting, Changing Society and Future Infrastructure Online Today. I'm Makoto Kimura of Kyoto University, a JCE Board of Director. I'm serving as a moderator today. Nice to meet you all. First, as the opening remarks, I asked Professor Hitoshi Tanaka, JCE, IAC Senior Director, Tohoku University. Tanaka sensei, よろしくお願いします。
Yes. Thank you very much, Professor Kimura. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your coming today. We would like to start our International Roundtable meeting of 2021 JC annual meeting. My name is Hitoshi Tanaka, Tohoku University, a Senior Director of International Activities Center, JC. It is highly unfortunate that we couldn't gather all face-to-face this year due to COVID-19. But however, it is fortunate that online system enables us to meet together smoothly for our discussion, even without our actual trip. This year's topic of random meeting is, as Professor Kimura mentions, changing society and future infrastructure. And 6 speakers from various countries, including our president, will make presentations based on their experiences. Subsequently, we will have a discussion time. I'm looking forward to having a pleasant and fruitful discussions. Thank you for your kind attention. ありがとうございました。
Thank you for Professor Tanaka. So we start the session. Starting the session, we have having 5 distinguished speakers. First is Mr. Taniguchi, the JC president. Second is Professor Stan Sohort, Deputy Governor for Industry, Trade and Transportation, Jakarta, Indonesia. Third and fourth speaker is Dr. Brett Phillips, ACE, immediate past Region 10 Governor, and Dr. Warren Radbrook, President of the ACE New Zealand Group. And 5 is Associate Professor Gwen Hoang Zhang, Vice Rector of Hanoi University of Civil Engineering, Vietnam. Third, the presenter is Professor Benit Pacheco of University of Philippines, Dili Man, the Philippines. He is a former president of Philippines Institute of Civil Engineering. So we start from the Mr. Taniguchi, the IJC president. Okay, first we listening to the 5, the presentation, and after that we shift to the question and answers session. So please, the listen the presentation. First presenter is Mr. Taniguchi.
Hello everyone. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Hiroaki Taniguchi. I am the 109th president since the General Assembly on June 11th. I used to work for Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport for 30 years and 38 years. I retired from the ministry 11 years ago, and I have worked as university professor. From 2 years ago, I have assumed the current position of this society. Before the panel discussion, I'd like to share with you the current status and initiatives of the Japan Society of Civil Engineers. Japan Society of Civil Engineers, JSCE, was established in 1914 and it's Japan's largest civil engineering organization, consisting of about 40,000 people from the worlds of industry, academia, and government. The Articles of Incorporation state that JSCE shall contribute to the advancement of the scientific culture and the development of society by promoting the field of civil engineering, developing civil engineering activities, and improving civil engineering skills. We work in the Japanese spirit of Ko Kai Rai, which means to inherit a business from one's predecessors and move it forward. At JSCE, although there are some restrictions due to COVID-19, we leverage online technology to promote exchanges and relationships between industry, academia, and politics, and being the hub of information, knowledge, and wisdom, and making timely proposals based on evidence. And these are the key roles. And we are also expected to lend an ear in times of trouble. In an age of declining birth rate, aging population, and declining population, securing future leaders is a pressing issue. Like other industries do, we aim to be an open and attractive JSCE. We plan to formulate the big picture of revitalization and civil engineering in Japan after COVID June next year. So what is the big picture? In the US, they say that the big picture is necessary when everyone needs to work together. MBA also emphasizes the need for clear management policies in order to be fully prepared for the future and to eliminate anxiety about the future. It is essential to have a big picture of life and the economy that can be trusted and shared by many people. Civil engineering projects span over a long period from planning and design to construction, maintenance, and upkeep. And in the past, the government itself operated the project. Since the 1960s, there has been a division of labor, such as contracting and outsourcing of consultancy services. In the current trend of division of labor, many more people will be involved in the civil engineering project. It is essential to have a big picture that is backed up by projects and financial resources that are as specific as it can be. In order to develop big picture, we need to clearly understand what infrastructure is. Infrastructure means a substructure that supports the function of society or industry. As in the past, it is vital that this substructure continues to evolve and advance along with the superstructure of lifestyle and industry in response to the needs of the times, materials, construction, machinery, construction methods, and information have evolved through innovation. And the division of labor, but due to difficulties, the budget for public works has been continuously cut for more than 20 years. Infrastructure development still has a long way to go. As a result, as people say, lost 3 decades, our economy has been stagnant. Our global GDP presence has been reduced to 6%, which is 1/3 compared to the peak of our economic development. In order to expand and strengthen infrastructure in a planned, efficient, and proactive manner, we need to change the course of budget reduction and develop a big picture that clearly states the scale of investment required. It is essential to expand the infrastructure in a balanced manner in accordance with the expansion of life and economy. The current situation is unbalanced, as shown on the left. But it is necessary to achieve a balance, as shown on the right, as life and the economy expand. If we compare it to the body, we need to strengthen the lower part of the body as our upper part of the body grows. It is necessary to secure an appropriate budget for our infrastructure development. As for the procedure for developing the big picture, we are currently considering those 4 points. 1, sort and review existing proposals from JSCE and other institutions. 2, conduct online awareness survey on social capital, which has been already conducted in May with 3,000 people in Japan. In general, more and more people are feeling anxiety about their future. Survey showed that people in the area where infrastructure development is slow are more likely to be pessimistic about their future. I got the impression that many young people are giving up their hope. Also, this survey suggested that the need for the big picture is high. 3, we will solicit opinions on what the public, especially young people, expect from our country and city using our Note website. We will kick it off from the September general meeting. 4, we conduct survey on long-term plans for infrastructure and the amount of investment. We will review the past projects and predict a trend accurately. Based on the above, we plan to deepen discussions and formulate the big picture and put forward our recommendations. We live in a time of major changes such as globalization, IT and digital transformation, climate change and energy issues, and the spread of COVID-19 infection. In order to solve these problems, global cooperation is essential. This is also an era of rapid technological progress in IT and other fields. The importance and necessity of global information sharing in the field of infrastructure is increasing. I am looking forward to today's roundtable meeting, a presentation from each country, and active discussions to follow. That concludes my brief introduction of JSCE's current status and initiatives. Thank you very much.
Thank you for Mr. Taniguchi. He's talking about the story about the big picture of JSCE.
皆さん、こんにちは。
Next presenter is Professor Stanto.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Sutanto, professor at the University of Indonesia. Nice to meet you, and let me present a paper that might be interested for you to know about the PPP project or the public-private partnership. Thank you. Thank you very much for the time given by JSCE for me to present the topic on public-private partnership in Indonesia. Well, this is some of my experience being part of the government of DKI Jakarta as the deputy governor, that I've been facing some of the project proposed by private sectors. Okay, I don't want to talk about the biography. I think JC will already mention about my biography. So we will be talking, if you say something about the public-private partnership. Actually, this is a very common approach. I think that government tried to move from the conventional approach to the current approach. In which in the conventional one, actually government are really quite limited in the financial or in their own budget. So actually, in both sides, the government is having some sort of obligation to provide the public domain infrastructures. And so they have a kind of development, asset development, and also community service at the end of the process. But what we are trying to do within the PPP project is actually we try to convert from the conventional to the PPP, in which I think the task of the government is still the same. They have the obligation, I think, to serve the public, and then also they have to provide the infrastructures. But then within this PPP, government is trying to invite the participation of the private sectors. So plus here is meaning something that we have to go through with the PPP. Can we go back slightly to the previous slides? Okay, actually what we try to a bit explain here, actually the process is quite similar. We are moving I think from the conventional to PPP by having some sort of partnership. We still keep our orientation with the public needs, and also we try to keep up with the project which have to fulfill some sort of the minimum level of service to the public. So this is a very bottom line that we have to fulfill within the service. And what we need is actually also to invite the participation of the public sectors, of the private sectors to do some sort of financing, because government is quite limited in their own budget or in their financial fiscal. So in that case, I think both sides, government and also the public, they have to be careful enough, I think, to see the risk. So risk has to be a kind of risk sharing also. So the risk allocation is quite important between the private sectors and also the government. So what will be the benefit of this PPP is actually we will get some sort of sustainability within the planning, construction, operation, and maintenance process. And also we expect that all the project will be on schedule, on budget, as well as right time on service. And what we have to do is actually how to optimize the project leverage, with the same amount of money, whether they are being conducted by government or if it's going to be conducted by private sectors. Well, the characteristic, I think, is quite simple. So we have to go through these 7 essential conditions that define the public-private partnership. Those are the arrangement between the public and private sectors and other parties, the partners. And we are talking about the risk sharing here between the government and also the non-government agencies. And then also we do some sort of arrangement also for public and private, in the sense of we have to create sort of standards, even though we know that standard is actually being given by the regulator, in this case it's government, but we have to be focused on the quality of service and performance. So I think in the end, when the private sector has to do the operation, then they have to comply with the minimum standard level. Then we agree with all those things, then we come to the investment, in which we try to invite the participation of private sector to invest and also to manage the public assets by the regulation given by government also. So all the signal will be given by government in that case. And payments should be part of this project, which is, I think, linked to the performance. So what you pay is actually the service with a certain level of quality. And we are very much concerned, of course, with the time period of the cooperation of these public-private partnerships. So if you look at the role sharing between government and private sectors, it may vary actually. It may vary from the low level of cooperation to up to the high level of cooperation, which is private sector can play their roles along this condition, which is, I think, the lowest participation would be how the service and they're working with the contract. And there have been a lot of works on this. There are many projects on this already, but we are trying to move to the right side actually. We are giving the private sectors to do the management and maintenance of contract, and then also operation and maintenance concessionaire, as well as coming to the build, operate, transfer concessionaire. But within the extreme side would be, I think, we do sort of privatization. This is a very fully high responsibility of the private sector being given all the responsibilities of all these infrastructure projects. So there is some misperception in the public actually, and we have to be firm with that. I think we have to comply with the definition that PPP is basically not a transfer of government obligation in providing service to public. Rather, this is PPP is also a kind of financing, yeah, within the design, build, and operate infrastructure project given to public or private sectors. And also, we have to know that the private investment is not a free contribution. We have to underline this because any single money that given by the private sector has to be paid back by the government. So in that case, the provision of a public service has to be there. So we have to uplift the maintenance of, to maintain the provision of the public service here. PPP is also not a privatization of public goods. Yeah. This is sometimes being misperceived by public that merely because of the misunderstanding, we have to be able, I think, to explain that the privatization is different with this kind of PPP project. And also, eventually, the PPP is not a government loan or debt. Yeah, rather, this is the private sector financing scheme. The process that we have to go through within this model, the business model can go into different directions. One is the project being initiated by government. So this is a kind of solicited project, which is this project is actually becoming like the obligation of government, but they're quite limited in their budget or in their fiscal. So they are trying to invite the private sector. So in general, this project is economically feasible, but not financially viable. That's why private sector has to be part of this. But the initiation of the project is still being given by government actually. So they can go up like what we can see here, the business flow is coming from the project identification, yeah, by government, yeah. And then there is some prelim study by the government also. And also there are some business case, business outline of the case, as well as the financial business case. And then they come from the tendering process, like the pre-qualification, and then the request for proposal or RFP, and then bidding the award, as well as the PPP contract sign. So eventually we come to the financial close to conduct the project. So there will be some construction and operation of the project. So within this scheme, within the solicited scheme, actually government support will be a kind of viability gap funding or VGF, or maybe a sort of project development facilities given to the private, as well as the infrastructure guarantee. So private sector provide the existence of the infrastructures, and then government will guarantee to pay all these infrastructures in the end. And the other direction is the unsolicited one, which is being given or initiated by private sectors, but also, of course, they have to comply with the big picture or big planning of the government, and they try to fill up some of the patchwork here. So the proposed project will be given, of course, by the government, which is economically visible and financially viable. So the concern of the private sectors or the public is actually how viable the project is. The business flow is coming similar like the solicited one, in which the difference is actually all the things start from the beginning, that the private sector is submitting some project proposal and some preliminary study, and then they go through the evaluation, yeah, by government, and government will be giving sort of letter to proceed. And then they go also to the private sector submit study for this, yeah. And of course, there will be some other evaluation from the government, and then if the government will be considering this as a feasible project, then they will be given sort of approval, yeah. And after the approval letter, they may go to some bidding process, and then the contract is being signed, yeah. And then, of course, the private sector will provide the financial, either they got some funding from the bank or some other financial institution, and they got some financial close to come up with the construction and operation. What would be the benefit from the private sector in this process is actually the compensation given by government. Yeah, I think in this case, the private sector will get some sort of benefit of getting, say, for example, the additional score of 10% to bidding document. Yeah, whether they will do the project or not doing the project, or maybe the project will be done by some other parties, it's okay, but they may get already some 10% of bidding documents. So they might be having sort of higher chances to get the project. They may also have a kind of right to match, means they have some sort of benefit also. And also, I think the government contract agency would somehow probably buying the unsolicited proposal given by the private sectors. Yeah. So this is the three possibilities of benefit being given to the private sector whenever they do the unsolicited proposal. I think these are all my presentation. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you for Professor Stunt. We got the information of the PPT, some concept or benefits or 7 essential conditions, and finally the role sharing, such kind of things. We got the information. Thank you very much. The next presenter is Dr. Brett Phillips from Australia, and another co-presenter is Dr. Warren Radbrook from maybe Auckland. Is it okay? So please start the presentation.
Welcome to this presentation on infrastructure planning in Australia and New Zealand. My name is Brett Phillips and I'm joining you from Sydney in Australia, and I'm joined by my co-presenter Warren Ladbrook, based in Christchurch in New Zealand.
Pleased to meet you all.
Our presentation today will cover a number of topics, overview a number of topics, including demographics, government authorities, infrastructure partnerships and research, COVID demographics, COVID impacts on infrastructure, and will overview 3 elements of infrastructure in the digital, water and energy spaces. Demographics has a huge impact on infrastructure planning. That includes issues in relation to an ageing population and increasingly urban population, expansive regions and contracting populations within those regions, First Peoples of Australia and New Zealand, and migration both to Australia and New Zealand. All of these issues are major drivers in relation to infrastructure planning. This is a comparison of the demographics across Australia, New Zealand and Japan. The urban population densities in Australia, New Zealand and Japan are comparable. The non-urban population densities in Australia and New Zealand are vastly different to those in Japan. The challenge in Australia and New Zealand is that its urban centres are far apart and that non-urban population densities are low. This is shown graphically in the next 2 slides. This is a graphic of the population density or distribution of population across Australia and across New Zealand and also Japan. Within Australia and New Zealand, there are a number of authorities and government departments who are responsible for infrastructure planning. The national infrastructure authorities in Australia and New Zealand are Infrastructure Australia and New Zealand's Infrastructure Commission Te Wahanga, respectively. Infrastructure Australia advises governments, industry and the Australian community on the investments and reforms needed to deliver better infrastructure for all Australians. It maintains an infrastructure priority list to ensure that the public funds are directed towards projects that will deliver the best outcomes for growing communities. Infrastructure Australia also develops research and advice on the broader opportunities for infrastructure reform and publishes new and interactive data to support better infrastructure decision making. The Infrastructure Commission in New Zealand is an autonomous Crown entity with an independent board. The Infrastructure Commission seeks to lift infrastructure planning and delivery to a more strategic level, and by doing so improve New Zealand's long-term economic performance and social well-being. Every state or territory in Australia has a government department or authority which is responsible for infrastructure forward planning. This slide identifies each of those agencies. One of the challenges, certainly within Australia, is to ensure that infrastructure planning is coordinated across the three levels of government, that being the national government, state governments and local government. The infrastructure priority list released by Infrastructure Australia provides a credible pipeline of nationally significant proposals for government at all levels to choose from. It provides evidence-based advice to support an informed national conversation about Australia's spending priorities. And this figure here shows the interrelationship between infrastructure planning at the three levels of government. All states and territories in Australia, as well as New Zealand, have infrastructure plans or strategies with horizons that vary from 15 years to 30 years. The intent of all state and territory plans are similar. As an example, the Infrastructure Western Australia vision is supported by three pillars: to improve long-term public sector infrastructure planning to support the economy and to grow jobs, to be proactive and foster innovation to achieve better economic, social and environmental outcomes, and to provide evidence-based expert advice to government to inform infrastructure decisions. As identified by Infrastructure South Australia, an integrated or systems-based approach ensures interactions and relationships are working within the same strategic context, vision, and common planning assumptions. Key considerations include better integration of land use and infrastructure planning, improving infrastructure planning and prioritisation, optimisation of current assets through better asset management, and funding, financing and procurement alternatives. Some of the think tanks and research centres which are focused on infrastructure are identified on this slide also. Infrastructure Partnerships Australia is an industry think tank and an executive member network, providing research focused on excellence in social and economic infrastructure. It aims to shape public debate and drive reform for the national interest. By 2046, Australia's population is projected to increase by 11.8 million people. Over the next 4 years, governments across Australia will spend a record $185 billion on public infrastructure investment in response to population growth challenges. Infrastructure New Zealand is the nation's highly respected peak infrastructure body. Its core purpose is to advance best practice in the development of world-class transport, energy, water, telecommunications and social infrastructure for all New Zealanders. It does this through research, advocacy and public and private sector collaboration. Its members are leaders from diverse sectors across New Zealand. In 2020, the Australian Academy on Technology and Engineering, or ATSE for short, released a position paper on building Australia's future. The resilience, planning, social licence and funding of civil infrastructure present critical challenges to governments and communities, which must be better equipped to deal with national disasters now and into the future. Its four positions are: resilience to national disaster, technological changes and cyber attacks must be considered in all infrastructure projects now and in the future. The vision, capability, trust, continuity and consistency are the key drivers for infrastructure projects that require long-term planning and implementation strategies. Engaging the local community when initiating an infrastructure project is key to establishing a social license. And economic recovery should be supported by funding infrastructure projects with short to medium completion times. Now I'd like to hand over to Warren to further outline infrastructure initiatives in Australia and New Zealand.
Thank you, Brett, and greetings from New Zealand. The slide you see now is about the infrastructure pipeline for Australia and for New Zealand. This chart was prepared by the Australia-New Zealand Infrastructure Pipeline under the auspices of the Infrastructure Partnerships Australia. The pipelines are presented by the different states and territories of Australia, plus New Zealand. The sectors are coded by colour, with road, rail, other transport, energy, water and sewage, waste and recycling, social, telecom, and other. In energy, the pipelines in West Australia, New South Wales, and Northern Territory stand out. Those are the yellow ones. And in road and rail, there's projects in New South Wales and Victoria, which are also significant. This chart provides an indication of where the different projects are in the pipeline process, with the categories being prospective projects, detailed planning, projects that have been announced, they're under procurement or awarded. The pipelines are also colour-coded by the different states in Australia and also New Zealand. The prospective and announced projects in West Australia stand out, as do the announced and under procurement projects in New South Wales. The chart was also prepared by these governing bodies, as I mentioned before. COVID has had an international impact, as you will all realise, and that is certainly the case in Australia and New Zealand as well, with lockdowns in place in both Australia and New Zealand at present. The number of cases are, as you'll see, quite high in relation to what we would like, albeit they are somewhat better than other countries around the world. We are fortunate that the number of deaths are quite low, and this is an advantage of being an island nation, or island nations. I would also note that the vaccination program is starting in both countries, but is lagging behind some of the other countries in the Northern Hemisphere. So in terms of the impact on infrastructure within Australia, a national study on the impacts of the pandemic was conducted in December 2020, and this report identifies the impact of migration changes and the consequences for skills and infrastructure demand. It reviewed a wide range of infrastructure trends, their geographic distribution, and their likelihood of returning to historical trends after the pandemic. And those different points are highlighted in the slide, which I believe will be available afterwards. The trends across Australia, there's 5 different things here. One is digitization. There's been a rapid shift from physical to virtual interaction, just like we're having an online conference instead of one in person, which is certainly convenient for users who can call in from home. There's been decentralization, redistribution of demand for utilities, and increased vibrancy in regional centres. There's also been localism, better use of local infrastructure, and local and regional vibrancy were evident. There's more trips and travel remaining in the regions, as one can imagine. Service innovations, providers are moving towards online platforms, and that applies to education, health, and other services. And I think the most important one is adaptability, a responsive repurposing of infrastructure and assets, and quickly scaling up latent capacity. Within New Zealand, the impacts have been a large amount of funding by government. So this started in the middle of the lockdown. The government tasked a group of industry leaders to seek out infrastructure projects that were quote unquote shovel ready. And the idea being these were ready to start as soon as the construction industry returned to normal. And this was all about reducing the economic impact of the pandemic. These included a mix of smaller projects that could demonstrate a direct and immediate benefit to the regional economies and communities, as well as some large projects. There were submissions received on about just under 2,000 projects with a combined value of about $136 billion over a wide-ranging number of projects. The announcement on the 1st of July last year identified 150 projects that were shortlisted to receive the government stimulus funding of $2.34 billion, which for a small country is still a lot of money. In terms of the digital infrastructure, what services are likely to use in the future that will require supporting digital infrastructure? Within Australia, the vast geographic area and dispersed population is a key challenge to ensuring universal and reliable connectivity. The mix of connective technology across New South Wales, which includes fibre optic, copper, wireless, and satellite, is an example of this challenge. There's also evidence of increasing unmet demand for digital connectivity and also dissatisfaction with current service levels across the state. In terms of preparing for technological change in the infrastructure sector, there are 4 technologies and 1 technology theme that stood out as having a transformative impact across all sectors. Those being artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, the idea of digital twins, immersive media or augmented reality or virtual reality, and cybersecurity. The potential impact of these technological changes are also summarized in this slide. I'm not going to read all the words on this slide here about system level recommendations, but if we can move on to the water infrastructure, make some comments about that. Did want to highlight that primarily about New Zealand, the water reforms that are taking place at the moment, which are significant. This is in response to the 2016 outbreak in Havelock North, where there were reported 5,500 people infected, 4 deaths and 4 people who were permanently disabled. As a result of that, we're looking at taking the water administration away from the local councils and centralizing those into 5 large organizations within the country. These are geographically based. Obviously, there's advantages by standardizing and having some economy of scale. And there are also some disadvantages with respect to the economics and the uncertain costs associated with making this transaction, especially for those councils who've already invested heavily in the infrastructure. I'll make some comments about energy. I know there's a transition to net zero carbon emissions that are by 2050 that are targets. But these 2 graphs are showing the energy generation side of things. And in this, you'll see that on the right-hand side, in the dark blue, in New Zealand, we have a lot of generation that is by hydropower and a mix of other sources. And in Australia, there's still a heavy reliance on coal and oil. So in both countries, there's still quite a lot of work to be done. I would note that Australia is investing heavily into energy, and so that's very, very positive. I'll hand it back over now to Brett to make some summary comments.
Thanks, Warren. So in summary, and this has been a very quick presentation, so there are resources which are available within the presentation for those who wish to explore any of these issues in greater depth. But in summary, the urban population densities in Australia and New Zealand and Japan are comparable. The challenge in Australia and New Zealand is that its urban centres are far apart and that non-urban population densities are low. Both Australia and New Zealand have national infrastructure authorities. Each state or territory in Australia also has a government department or authority which is responsible for infrastructure planning. So certainly within Australia, this is quite a crowded space. The challenge, particularly in Australia, but to a degree also within New Zealand, is to ensure that infrastructure planning at all levels of government is aligned. All states and territories in Australia, as well as New Zealand, have infrastructure plans or strategies with horizons that vary from 15 years out to 30 years. Over the next 4 years, governments across Australia will spend a record $185 billion on public infrastructure investment in response to population growth challenges. The Australia-New Zealand Infrastructure Pipeline provides an overview of the infrastructure projects in various stages, as well as a breakdown by infrastructure categories for those who are interested. In the available time, we've only been able to provide an overview of infrastructure planning across Australia and New Zealand. The following 4 slides provide links to organisations and authorities where infrastructure planning and plans can be explored in far greater detail. So both Warren and I thank you for your interest in our presentation, and we look forward to responding to any questions as part of the remaining session within this roundtable meeting. Thank you for your interest.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Brad and Dr. Warren. I am very interested in the future infrastructure in Australia and New Zealand. So the next presenter is Professor Zhang from the Vietnam. So please start the presentation.
Hello everyone, my name is Nguyễn Hoàng Giang from National University of Civil Engineering, Hanoi, Vietnam. And thank you very much, Jesse, for the opportunity today for me. And I would like to make the presentations regarding construction, demolition, waste valorization and management in Vietnam, a circular economy approach, and a 3R model proposal. As Vietnam is experiencing a very rapid development, also the construction sector also developing quite fast, about 10% per year. It generates quite large amount of CDW. For example, like Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh is about 3,000 tons per day. But no available site for the CDW currently, because for example, like Hanoi, there are 4 sites but already full and closed. And the CDW used to just only dump at the site, for example, like for natural ponds. So that's why the illegal dumping might occur, so causing the problem as well. As the recycling rate in Vietnam is still very low, just about 2%, while other countries, for example, like Japan, where more than 99% of concrete is recycled. So that's why in order to reduce the illegal dumping, we need to increase the recycling rate for Vietnam for CDW. So that's why Vietnam has to move quickly. The Vietnamese government recently issues the Decision 491 or Directive 41 that mention 90% of CDWs must be collected or 60% of CDW must be recycled. So it's very ambitious. And also until 2025, all 5 biggest cities in Vietnam, the final disposal for solid waste must be less than 20%, where others province must be reduced to 25%, less than 25% until 2025. And the current regulation in Vietnam is that the law for environment protection already mentioned about the circular economy, while others policy already require the reuse and recycle. currently, the circular number 8 issued by the Ministry of Construction mentioned that the province and contractor must uh, short CDW outside and submit a plan before demolition. And some Vietnamese standards for the solid waste recycled material already issued. And the Vietnamese government, Ministry of Construction and Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources uh, are in charge of the CDW treatment, and the assignment to all the cities to in charge and issue their own guideline and policy for the areas that in the province. And for the contractor, already some part of kind of sorting already carry out, like outside for gypsums, wood, and other things. And these valuable materials like steel will be sold to scrap buyers. And aside already some sort of some kind of sorting already carry out for gypsum and metals that you can see over here. However, there is still no guideline from the government that the contractor can follow. We carry out the investigation for 56 contractors in Hanoi, Ho Chi Minh, and Haiphong, and we found that the contractors are not aware of the legal system in Vietnam currently, and they worry that with kind of guideline or sorting, they will increase the price, and they're afraid of the lack of the treatment facility. So that's why we need the circular economy approach for CDW, and the contractor just carry the demolition just by its own experience, just demolish and also transport to the site. And so without the supervision, this could be dumped illegally somewhere. uh, in order to get to 3Rs model, we can see that some barriers for CDW waste treatment in Vietnam. First, we mentioned that's still lack of the guideline for the on-site sorting, and still no recycling plans for CDW yet. Still mostly just dumped somewhere at the site or maybe illegally, and still will the lack of the standards and specification for the recycled materials, and the lack of new technology that the companies and stakeholders get approach. And we do not have the prior reference in which is very important to enter the government projects, and also still no supervision mechanisms yet. So that's we need to improve this and to get uh, over the barriers in order to get to 3R effectively. For the proposal that already mentioned in the decision 1266, that natural resources must be reduced and already requires 60% material using for the construction materials must be from the recycled materials. And so that's we propose a model from natural resources and construction materials to be applied in manufacturing, and to be used the recycled materials. And for the demolition process, the guideline for on-site sorting is very important for contractor to follow. And after that, the materials will be brought to CDW waste treatment facility, where the new technology should be applied and standard to accept this to be reused in the construction. So that's you can see the model from the starting process. The planning is very important, and after that, demolition, the materials, how to be shot outside and transport to the facility and to be used for business. To get this, we propose such projects together with the Saitama University and National University of Civil Engineering. We have NIES and SES already joined with us. In Vietnam, we have MOC and also MONRE to join for the research and to propose a model both for the research and also for the business application as well. So one of the results for the projects that we made the comparisons between the mobile plant and stationary plant for recycling the RCA. As the landfills are no longer available in Vietnam, Hanoi, four sites already full and closed. Da Nang, Khánh Sơn sites already full. Ho Chi Minh, no site for accepting the CDW. So that's why the investment for the recycling plant is very important. And we made the comparison. We found that the stationary plant investment is quite low in compare with mobile plant, and as well as the operation cost also very low in compare with mobile plant. Just only if the site for the plant, the stationary plant is more than 44 kilometers, so the mobile plant show more advantage. So that's why with the assumption that the RCA recycle RCA cost is about 70% in compare with natural one, is very competitive in compare with even the natural aggregates. So that's why the market is there. If we do the investment, we make investment for the stationary plant, economical profit can be get by the stakeholder who participate in this business. So with that prospect, we investigated three big cities in Vietnam already: Hanoi, Haiphong, and Da Nang. And we will also investigate research Ho Chi Minh and Cần Thơ soon. And in these projects, we intended to put the added value for the CDW by, for example, like using for the oil treatment or using for bay and sub-bays. And in order to promote these activities, we need to develop the guideline. So that's one of the results. Soon we will issue the Vietnamese standards for the acceptance of the CDW using for bay and sub-bays, and technical guideline for on-site sorting. And we support the local government to issue their own legal management for CDW. So this is my presentation. And thank you very much. That is the end of my presentation today.
Thank you for Professor
research
Zhang.
we carry now will support the Vietnamese government policies in order to achieve the CDW recycling to get to the sustainable development for Vietnam. And I wish all of you healthy during this pandemic. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Zhang. He introduced in detail, the example in Vietnam. It's related to the construction demolition waste. It's a CDW. So final presenter is Professor Pacheco from Philippines. So please start presentation, Professor Pacheco.
Thank you for inviting me. Longer than 30 years ago at the University of Tokyo, I was PhD student and then associate professor. Today, please allow me to speak first a little about infrastructure and civil engineering, second, a little about interdisciplinary, and third, more about foresight and features. Because of the pandemic, all our plans have been updated, including this medium-term Philippine Development Plan. The Philippine Vision for 2040 is about resilient, comfortable, and secure future. With the COVID-19 pandemic, the same vision of 2040 has this updated medium-term plan. We may notice that all the parts of this overall plan point from below to above. The plan is really an aspiration, an ambition, a preferred vision. And perhaps these are the parts that involve us civil engineers a lot. We note, starting again from below in red, infrastructure, safety, environment, and then wellness, technology, innovation, governance, and digitalized economy. Of course, clear emphasis on wellness has been prompted by the pandemic, and so has been the acceleration of digitalization of the economy. Hence, this is the updated image of Philippine community. You may wonder whether it is intentional that in this scenario, we keep the face masks. Such is the updated plan of our National Economic and Development Authority, or NEDA. Actually, economists and development planners acknowledge that there are many uncertainties about the future, there are many opportunities, and many risks. Actually, what the Philippine NEDA is saying through our Vision 2040 and the updated Plan 2017 to 2022 is the following. Infrastructure development is not even in the Philippines. It is very uneven. Today in this roundtable meeting, perhaps we also acknowledge that the state of infrastructure development or the state of civil engineering all over the world is not even either. This is such a pervasive challenge, despite the common idea that civil engineering is an old profession. This is perhaps my first point in this short talk. Which leads to my second point today. Our civil engineering profession is not alone. We really collaborate in interdisciplinary initiatives with many disciplines and sectors. For example, let us refer next to the World Economic Forum. Annually, the WEF surveys global risks in the time horizon of 10 years through its public and private networks of leaders in business, government, academia, NGOs, and international organizations. They combine expertise about society, technology, environment, economics, and geopolitics. For the 2020 survey and its 2021 report, what did the 628 plus survey respondents see? What did they foresee about infrastructure and the 10 years of future? 35 global risks were studied, if significant or not. Public infrastructure, the main concern of civil engineering, is most prominently listed in the cluster of society risks in red. And there are 10 or more other risks related to infrastructure and civil engineering that are clustered with technology in purple, environment in green, economy in blue, and politics or geopolitics in orange. And 2 or 3 of those are now believed to be top risks in terms of likelihood in the next 10 years or in terms of impact globally. These are climate, environmental damage, and natural resources. We civil engineers cannot ignore such top issues for the future. These are also tough issues. And possibly we may also wonder what other issues might not have been revealed enough by the WEF surveys. Meanwhile, Future Earth program by the UN is a 10-year international interdisciplinary research program on global change. For the second year now, the Future Earth also re-examined the global risks that were revealed and ranked by the World Economic Forum. Future Earth also promotes a transdiscipline called decision science. In this new book about the new conceptual framework, I take note that among the co-authors is a fellow civil engineer from Kyushu University here in Japan. Also, for almost 50 years now, there has been the World Future Studies Federation. It seems that not many civil engineering researchers have been members so far. I may be mistaken. Going back to the World Economic Forum survey of 2020 that has been reported in 2021, we note that 15% of those who viewed the global risks for the next 10 years were from Asia. Now, let's get to my third and last point for today. How about foresight for Asia in 10, 20, 30, 50 or more years? What we need is foresight of infrastructure futures that is greater than, more than a singular forecast. Allow me now to speak some more about concepts in the discipline of future studies. One concept, the scale of time is not necessarily linear. To reflect on this idea, both in terms of personal as well as social contexts, we may start by examining different experiences, such as when time seems to fly, when time seems to stand still, when time seems very oddly to turn backward, or when time seems to jump forward because of our anticipation. Another concept, in studies of futures or futures studies, we start by acknowledging that the future is not singular. Indeed, the future does not exist yet. What we study are the following: possible futures in the plural, probable futures, which we think have the highest likelihoods, still not singular, and preferred future, which we choose for ourselves among the many probable futures on the basis of our anticipation and the assumptions that underlie our anticipation. A related concept is this: just as there is a range of many futures, here illustrated inside a so-called cone of possible futures, I believe that in the past there is also what we may call a collection of past narratives or a cone of unexamined pasts. We also need to study our cone of unexamined pasts behind us while studying our cone of possible futures in front of us. Now, please allow me to summarize my third and last point for today. Our success in foresight of Asian infrastructure futures is dependent, firstly, on our so-called futures literacy. For example, this UNESCO scientific research report is a good place for us civil engineers to start with. We will read some about science, technology, and innovation, and a lot about psychology, anticipation, and decision-making for the future in the face of uncertainty. If there are so-called futures studies, now I count myself as a futures student. If there is a so-called futures literacy, now I'm inspired to learn to become futures literate. Meanwhile, here are some excerpts from the introduction to this book. Thank you for inviting me to this roundtable meeting. Now is my opportunity to invite civil engineers who are members of the 15 societies and institutions belonging to the ACECE, Asian Civil Engineering Coordinating Council. Please join our new Technical Committee 27. Together, let us do futures studies to become futures literate and to be able to engage in truly interdisciplinary strategic foresight for infrastructure in Asia in general and in our own community in particular. I look forward to learn together with you about our anticipation systems for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Pacheco. You introduced us the ASEC, the TC27 some program. It is related to the future literacy. So if some people wanted to join this TC27, please contact the JCE. So thank you very much for the 5 presentation. ここでちょっと日本語でお話しさせていただきます。
I'd like to switch to Japanese here. So from now, you can put your questions in the Q&A, or you can raise your hand to ask questions as well. First, among the presenters, maybe we can have a roundtable panel discussions. And after that, we can hear questions from the floor.
So we start question or discussion time. So at first, we ask the presenter who has some question to the another presenter. So, Professor Stunt, you have a question to the another presenter?
Yeah, thank you, Kimura-sensei. Actually, I would like to raise some questions from our colleague from Australia and New Zealand, wondering that there are some impact actually from the pandemic COVID-19. Although I know that the impact to the Australian and also the New Zealand country, they might not be that severe as compared to my country, but I believe there might be some policy from the government how to do sort of reallocation of the budget for the infrastructure development, because there might be some more spending on the other sectors like the health sector. That kind of thing is happening also in my country because of the pandemic. But I'm just curious that probably also Australia and New Zealand have the similar policy on that. And secondly, I would like also to ask probably there might be some lack of budget to maintain the growth of the infrastructures. So is there any kind of participation, I think, from the private sectors to give sort of financing also to the infrastructure sectors? I think this is my question to colleagues from Australia and also the New Zealand. Thank you so much.
I can say then quickly from a New Zealand perspective, it's probably a little bit different in Australia. But in New Zealand, after the global financial crisis, the government had taken quite a conservative financial position, so that when the pandemic hit, they essentially incurred a lot of debt to fund subsidies to individuals and to businesses alike. This was possible because of their economic position. The challenge with all of that is it's not sustainable in the long term. So New Zealand has adopted an elimination strategy, which in the short term seems to be a good strategy. Not sure what the long-term results will be. But as a result of that, the economy within New Zealand bounced back quite quickly and life returned to normal quite quickly. And in that situation, the government, by investing in infrastructure type projects, what happened was lots of businesses went back to work and started to increase their capacity. People are out there working, and that boosted the economy. So what's happened is that there's been an increase in revenues that have been generated. And then with the way the interest rates are going, is the debt by government is slowly being eroded by inflation. At this point, the private industry is not invested to help fund those projects. It's primarily been government-led. I'll let Brett speak to what it might be like in Australia.
Warren.
Situation
is the
situation.
The situation in Australia is similar in that we were pursuing a strategy of elimination, but I guess with our recent experience that a number of our governments, both state and national, are moving away from that strategy because it's becoming increasingly difficult to achieve that with the Delta variant. There's a great push on vaccination to try and get the vaccination levels, the 2-dose vaccination levels of the Australian population to where it needs to be, and we're not there yet. In terms of economic impact, yes, the federal government did financially support the community through a range of schemes, one of those being JobKeeper, to keep people connected to their places of employment during the first round of shutdowns. That has now been withdrawn, and what's currently happening is that Australia in a number of states is back into lockdown due to COVID. So our economy did dip, it recovered, it's dipping again. Whether it will recover quite as rapidly as it did last time is yet to be seen. In relation to infrastructure funding, because one of the major features is that it has never been cheaper to borrow money than it is at present. In financial terms, it is extremely cheap to borrow money for infrastructure projects. Consequently, there's been less reliance on PPP to fund infrastructure because the capacity of government to borrow is greater than it has been in the not too distant past with the current interest rates. In relation to health, we haven't had the impacts in Australia that perhaps have been experienced in other countries. We're only starting to stress our healthcare system now to a degree, but the number of people that we have in hospitals due to COVID is still very low in comparison with many other countries. So our health system is coping with current numbers and is not under the level of stress that is experienced elsewhere. And I suspect that in New Zealand, it's even under less stress because New Zealand's numbers are lower than even the best states in Australia. So we're coping from that perspective. In terms of infrastructure, the greatest impact is going to be in the years to come because during this period, our migration has dropped to zero. And migration was a significant proportion of our population growth. Order of 60%, 60 to 70% of our population growth has been through migration. And that will stop probably for at least 2 years. So that is changing the dynamic in relation to drivers for infrastructure. The other change as well is that we are seeing a move from major cities more into rural towns and rural cities. And part of that is through better telecommunications, which is making it feasible for people to work from home or work from locations other than capital cities and still remain employed. So that is another factor which is changing the dynamics and perhaps will continue to change the dynamics over time. But what that does mean is that there's perhaps going to be a slightly greater emphasis on infrastructure in rural communities because of that change, that population driver, than perhaps was expected or planned for in the not too distant past.
Thank you, Dr. Bright.
It's okay for Professor Stunt.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
So the Professor Panchos have some question. You raise hands. So
thank you, Professor Kimura. May I ask a question to our JSCE President, Mr. Professor Taniguchi? Would you elaborate some more on what you mentioned as social capital as one of the things being looked into or recently looked into by the JSCE? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. I'd like to clarify my ideas, and I also mentioned earlier, and infrastructure is and will be also advancing and reinforced according to that's the evolution of the society and the culture. But here in Japan, it depends on that the budget about 106 trillion yen to today's national. But now the investment for the infrastructure is 6 trillion yen for. But now it's the peaked out in the 24 years ago. It was when we have a 9.8 trillion yen. It have declined to the 6 trillion yen. But in the past 24 years, it have and reduced by over 38%. So these investments of the infrastructure is and going proportionally and to that linked to the GDP. But when the US and the European countries about in the past 20 years, GDP have grown by the double. But only here in Japan, it was still on 500 trillion yen, 550 trillion yen. This is the growth in the past 20 years have been limited because the main reason is that now, because that and really the budgets of the national budget in Japan are really tight, so that accumulated the deficit is about double the GDP. It's go over 1,000 trillion yen. This is that national budget. So that's why now the big topic here in Japan is that how we can reconstruct for this fiscal situations. The Ministry of the Finance is now strongly gripping and now try to rule the national budgets. So I don't deny that the importance of the reconstructing and the restructuring that the finance and the fiscal situation, but we also have to have more of a plan, long-term investment in the infrastructure. So based on, for example, the COVID-19 pandemic, so that I understand that the current Japanese fiscal situation is very, very tight. So that's why we have to go along well in parallel with the economic growth as well as the reconstruction of the fiscal policy. But at the same time, just like the PPP or an alliance with the private sectors, I would have mentioned, but now, and in Japan, it's a little bit different from the other countries, and that is PFI is, for example, the UK and PR is now then reviewed. So that's why now, and they're trying to establish that kind of infrastructure investment bank. So that's why here in Japan, together with that and the PPP, we also have to think about that's the best mix with the taxation system. So with the COVID-19 this time, the Japanese, the medical insurance, public insurance system, so far have been renowned in the global, but now it turned out to be really vulnerable. So that's why this is the vulnerability of the insurance system is based on that kind of a decline in budgets in the past 20 years. So it is same is true for the infrastructure investments. So also in the past, that would be just, for example, in the past close to 30 years, they have been continuously reducing and declining. That was much too dramatic. So I'd like to say to the Ministry of Finance, it's important to reconstruct the fiscal policy, but you have to look at the economy as a whole, so that you have to revisit about this policy of declining investments to the infrastructure. This is my idea. Thank you very much.
Pachiko, is it okay for the Taniguchi's, the answer?
Yes, thank you. And may I ask a related question to Dr. Phillips, also about your mention of social license as one of the things of concern. What could be the elaboration of social license in the context of Australia?
Sorry, I will unmute myself. The joys of video conferencing. In terms of social license, that's really a case of gaining the support of communities for infrastructure projects. So rather than imposing projects on the community, it's a case of involving communities early in the decision-making process so that they don't feel left out, but rather they feel as though they are involved, and that the outcomes may not be everything that they would like, but at least they feel that they have been involved and their contribution has been considered rather than being simply ignored. So that can be very important, particularly in our major cities, where there are major infrastructure projects that directly impact on residential areas, communities, and the like. likewise, it can be an issue also in rural areas, particularly in relation to Indigenous communities and respecting their views as well, and factoring that into infrastructure projects. I can think of some projects where there has been a lot of debate about the alignment of an upgraded road because of its potential impact on various trees which were viewed as sacred by a local Aboriginal community. So being responsive to those sorts of issues to gain support for infrastructure projects rather than just imposing them on the community and telling them, this is what you need, rather than involving them in that decision-making process.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the Dr. Brett. Is it okay for the Pachiko Sensei? Yes, Phillips, Dr. Phillips.
Thank you. Just following on the presentations about futures, both Warren and I, our connection to this forum is through the American Society of Civil Engineers. So notwithstanding I'm in Australia, Warren's in New Zealand, we are also members and office bearers within the American Society of Civil Engineers. The reason I mention that is that one of the very exciting projects which is being undertaken by ASCE at present is a project called Future World Vision. And there is a lot of work going on in that space. A lot of resources are being created. But what it's looking at is envisaging potential future communities in 50 years' time. So there's quite a lot of research that has gone into it to identify major or significant contributing trends and the like. So if anybody is interested in that project, it's progressively releasing scenarios based on the visioning that has been going on. So it's an ongoing project. It's not fully released yet. It will continue for several years to come, but it's very much based on virtual reality as well. And there are resources that are available to universities to potentially offer lectures on this particular project and the sort of the visions of what future communities might look like as well. So if that's of interest to anybody who is joined into this meeting, all you need to do is go to the ASCE website and search for Future World Vision, and that will link you to a dedicated website with all the resources associated with that project. But it struck me that seemed to tie in quite nicely with a number of the presentations that have been given this afternoon regarding potential futures for our communities.
Thank you, Professor Dr. Brett. Professor Pacheco have already, pointed out future literacy is a very important thing. So everybody need to study the future literacy. The old man, young man, everybody need to study such kind of things as a civil engineer. So Professor Stan, do you have a question?
木村先生よろしいですか。
どうぞ。谷口先生。
Mr. Kimura, may I?
谷口さんどうぞ。
Thank you. Yes, as Dr. Pacheco said, so rather than the forecast as an extension, so the foresight in the future literacy is very important. In Japan, we also put the importance on the future design, and that requires political decision. But politics tends to be very conservative. When we look at Japanese way of handling COVID, well, we were able to have Olympics and Paralympics, but there's a huge gap in understanding between the government and the people. But ultimately, the politics needs to make a bold decision to create the brighter future. But as Dr. Philip Brett said, people have to drive the politics. Maybe using social media, younger people are leveraging social media, so that it's necessary. And for us to develop the big picture, actually it's supposed to be the government's responsibility, but the government is restricted by the budget, and they tend to be contracted in what they can do. So maybe the industry academy, government in a partnership is achieved in civil engineering. So as movement, we can summarize the proposals and also appeal to the government with this big picture. So in ASCE, so American Jobs Plan by the President Biden, so they collaborated with the US administration, and that is quite inspiring to us. So in JSCE, should also do similar activities and deliver results similar to ASCE. So in the remaining 1 year of my term, I would like to do my best. And thank you, Professor Patchett, about the future foresight and the future literacy. That was very inspiring for me.
So how is Professor Stunt Sensei?
Thank you, Professor Makoto. If I may have one question only to Professor Pacheco. Pacheco Sensei and me and some other colleagues, I think, are working with the university actually. And I'm just wanting to know actually, what would be the role of a professor like us, I mean, teacher, to give some more literacy, I think, for the infrastructure development in the future? Because, for example, I might say that sometime in our curricula in the campus, we like more to have some student to go for some apprenticeship. But I think those kind of activities, apprentice, would be also very useful and very meaningful for not only students, but also the professor, maybe also the teacher, because they might get even though they are producing scholars, but they may have to know also what would be the good curriculum, for example, for those students in order to get to the market, in order to get the future market in infrastructure development. I'm just curious. So not being an ivory tower, I think, in the campus. So we have to be something else. Thank you, Professor Pacheco.
If I may, I will try to perhaps give 2 levels of answers to Professor Santo. Yes, in the university, so there are departments and we have disciplines, and these are very like separate silos. You might be an engineer, you might be an architect, or you might be an economist or a lawyer, and somehow our trainings are so separate. The way we are approaching futures literacy now, quite recently in my university, is, for example, faculty and researchers in the disciplines of engineering, like myself, and public governance, or even political science, another. And a third one is economy or economists. We get together to discuss how our languages in our different disciplines address the future. So there's economic planning, there's engineering planning, there's government planning, but in fact, we mean different things because we focus on different things. So among us researchers, we try to, make each other understandable to the other. In terms of our students, I believe that one way to encourage or develop futures literacy is we should expose our engineering students to students of economics or students of philosophy, because in the end, those others will be probably likely to be the politicians, and we should understand how they think, how they envision 10 years or 20 years. So among faculty and researchers, yes, we have to relearn because maybe we're too or overly specialized. And among our young students, we have to start them early, learning from each other, because future is not the monopoly of engineering planners. We cannot unilaterally decide how the infrastructure would look. We need the politicians and the economists and even psychologists to make the public appreciate, as Dr. Phillips said, accept, appreciate, well support infrastructure plans. So yes, futures literacy, as the UNESCO advocates, is not only young people's literacy. This is really adult education. There's a psychology, there's a science behind how politicians plan their future, how economists plan, how engineers plan, and we can learn from each other. So it's really education. So we hope that university people can contribute, not by our traditional learnings, but by this interdisciplinary mutual learning.
Thank you, Professor Pacheco.
How is Professor Zhang? You have some opinion?
Thank you very much. The question is very interesting because here in Vietnam also we are discussing how the academic can work with the policy in for the government in order to make the positive impact for the development. So what we're doing here in Vietnam, that we are working with the government in terms of first for the standards and also the policy based on the science and also the research result. Currently also here in our university, we're working with the regional government when they want to implement certain kind of policy. And we work with them for the investigation and also to implementation, for the implementation of the policy. And also we also work with the central government in the certain policy, because we, the scientists, also we base on the results, and we can recommend both for policy and as well as also for the standard. As well as also we work with the government in terms of the government education and training for certain sectors when the government want to focus in certain areas. And also we keep also discussing also with the government policymakers to work with them in certain issues when the government needs the consults from the university member as well. And for university, we encourage students to join different kind of startup, and also we work with industry so that we can understand more about the industry, how the private sectors and also the government sector work, and also we can connect and as well as to play a certain role in this process from the government, from policy making and to the implementation. So that's some point of mine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So from now we wanted to ask the floor, ask the question from the floor or general audience. So if someone have some question, please raise hands and give us some question or comment. At that time, please say your name and affiliation slowly. Are there any questions from the floor?
Professor Kimura, yeah, one person raised
Yes.
the hand, so I will allow the mic to
It's
be
allowed.
turned on. Yes, I will from now.
Okay. Please make a
Now the
question.
mic is available. Please speak out.
Now it's available.
Just a little introduction about me. I am Dr. Ataur Rahman. I am a professor here at the university in Bangladesh. I got my master's and PhD from Japan, Hokkaido University. And Professor Ueda was my supervisor, actually. Professor Ueda will be the next JSC president, I guess. So I'm very happy and very excited to know this news. So my question is actually that everyone in the world is passing a very hard time due to this COVID outbreak and onset of these hardships. So everything was at the beginning a pause. Actually, in my country, the construction, the development industries, infrastructure, everything, and now it's gaining a little bit pace now after the vaccination programs. So my question is, what Japan is doing and thinking to keep this pace of infrastructure development and other constructions to carry forward, because we still don't know when this COVID will be over. Maybe we have to live with COVID next 10 years, 15 years, we're not sure. So I just want to know from the policymakers, or maybe someone from Japan and some professor, what they are thinking after they just finished successfully the Olympic. And I think Japan is very much good in doing something in policy level or execution level. Thank you.
Are there any presenter who has some answer or some comment? How is Mr. Taniguchi?
はい、ありがとうございます。日本の場合
Thank you
は
very much. Here in Japan, and we have been tied up with the COVID-19 pandemic policies. So that's why we have been we have to be postponed for all these investments. So that's now, and the government is trying to implement about over 70 trillion yen of the third supplemental budget. But now, about when it comes to the post COVID-19, or when it comes to just about still that no one has that clear vision after the COVID-19. So something in the near future. So that's why, and there was no such a thing as a long-term plan for the investments to the infrastructure. So this May, then about the infrastructure related, the 5-year plan have been formulated by the government, but it's still really ambiguous and fuzzy, and it does not include any specific projects or the budget. So this is still, it is not enough to persuade or to convince that many citizens in Japan, or for all these party concerns, including the construction companies or then all the industries, so that they can share that's the vision or start the preparation for that's the investments or the projects after the COVID-19. So that's why I think that's now, and our JSCE tried to formulate the big picture to appeal to the citizens, and so that the government can use that kind of initiative as serving as the basis for the future plan. So that's why we're doing this, for the JSCE doing this. In order to make the government have really that long-term projects and plan. I don't know exactly that this is the answering to your question, but this is my comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sensei. And thanks to all the speakers actually for their valuable presentation. I was from the beginning, I was here. Thank you very much.
Are there any another question from the audience?
Kimura Sensei.
Yes.
Yes, one more person raised their hands.
Okay.
Well, hello. My name is Asamoto from Saitama University. Can I ask one question to the panelist? Actually, in Japan, I joined some discussion the JSC annual conference last 2 days, and the main topic is 3D printing and artificial intelligence and digital transformation and so on. So that kind of state-of-art technology, very, very progressive. And then I would like to ask panelists the situation in each country, such kind of state-of-art, especially Australia. I'm wondering whether you already apply such kind of state-art of technology to the practical application. Would you please tell me the situation?
Okay, Dr. Blade or Dr. Warren, could you explain the Australia or New Zealand situation for the 3D printer or virtual reality or such kind of, the IoT or such kind of things, AI or such kind of things? If you know.
Very good qualifier there. I was just going to say that it's not an area that I'm overly familiar with, but I think it's fair to say that it's an emerging area within Australia in terms of the potential for 3D printing, artificial intelligence, these state-of-the-art technologies. It's an area of active research, and the challenge there on occasions can be to translate that research into industry. So connecting industry to research, whether it be through the Academy of Technological Science and Engineering and through other organisations, there is, certainly in Australia, there is always that challenge of a lot of our research is leading research, but to a degree, our industry can lag behind in adopting and implementing that. Part of that perhaps is because our resource industry is very strong, our manufacturing industry not so strong. So in years gone by, we did have, for example, a car manufacturing industry. We no longer have that. The government decided that they would not financially support the manufacturer of cars in Australia. That goes back, a few years now. So we have lost some technological capabilities in some sectors, but even so, there is a move, or certainly there is research, and the challenge will be to translate that into industry.
From a New Zealand perspective, I would say that here in New Zealand, primary industry is obviously a large part of our GDP, as well as tourism, which is effectively stopped due to the pandemic. We don't have so much talk about 3D printing, although I'm certain that it happens. And there's much more dialogue and talk about the Internet of Things, and in particular with respect to the digital twin. So there's a lot of effort to have a digital twin for all aspects of New Zealand. That is a growing initiative, which is still in the early stages, I believe. Certain areas perhaps are quite well developed in certain communities, but that is something that we're working to focus on. There is also a lot of pockets of innovation which are present in New Zealand, but I don't think that it's so much about 3D printing per se. It's more about how do we make things easier in the respective industries and activities of life that we find ourselves. So I think that's a very quick summary, and I'm sure is a disservice to the few people who may be focused on that area, but it's certainly not mainstream here.
Thank you very much. Yeah, in Japan also
okay.
same, demand is very high, but it's still under development, especially I think research area. Thank you very much.
Professor Zhang have some, the comment, and also the Professor Pacheco have some comments. So please give us some comment.
Thank you very much, Professor Kimura. So I would like also to respond to the question by Dr. Asamoto, because actually we have been working together for a very long time, and very happy to also to discuss with him, because it's been almost for 2 years that we cannot discuss it directly also in very details. But actually in Vietnam, so the topic that Dr. Asamoto points out is very hot topic here in Vietnam. So the government issues the list of more than 100 areas that with the priority where we should apply the latest development of the technology. So where AI or big data or also IoT going to be the priority for our application. So as also the researcher, when currently now when we apply a certain type of funding to the government funding, so these kind of areas normally get the priorities. For example, like also we just recently submitted the JSPS bilateral joint research. So the Ministry of Science and Technology also already pointed out that the priority area is that the application such kind of like blockchains, AI, or also other kind of the latest technology, 3D printing, and so on. So that's why the researcher and also the like us in Vietnam, so we have to also renovate also our research as well as to adapt to the situation. So that's why this is very just the right time that also today we just submit one proposal also applying that the also the question that Dr. Asamoto-san mentioned about. So I think that we also in Vietnam, we also now trying to keep up with the development of the international also development as well, especially from Japan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So how is Professor Pacheco?
Oh, thank you. I just would like to add that in terms of technologies, for a scientific report, global report, promoted, publicized by the UN, we are reminded that generally scientists consider that there are perhaps 4 or 5 major technology clusters that it is wise for us civil engineers to be acquainted with, whether adopters or co-developers. So digital is one of the 5. But there's also neurotechnologies, there's also nanotechnologies and biotechnologies and, well, what I could call clean technologies. And it is a challenge to us civil engineers, I would say. If we are not in the forefront of development in those fields, at least we should be clever adopters of what's current in, for example, nanotechnology and neuro, as they would assist construction, or biotechnologies as they would be useful in environmental engineering. So in general, there are many clusters of technologies, and somehow digital is most popular among us, among the people, but it's not only digital. There are others that we could be wise to keep track of so that we could wisely use or apply, or maybe co-develop through civil engineering. So yes, technology driven.
Thank you very much. Are there any comment for? At that time, another the question or comment from the floor?
木村先生、谷口ですが、よろしいですか？
Yes, はい、どうぞ。
This is Taniguchi. Yeah, okay, thank you very much. When it comes to the digital transformations, MRIT, this is now the Ministry of Infrastructure and Transportation is now put emphasis on the DX. And also, and September 1st, now the digital agency is established as part of the public central government organizations, effective September 1st. But what's important here is that the digital transformation is really major concept. But when it comes to that, the social positioning and social status of the civil engineers, how are we going to define that? For example, including the knowledge with intelligence, and this is the human intelligence have to be validated properly. So now we have just discussed some time earlier, and now in the now an aging society, we needed to invite and attract that's really talented young persons to the civil engineers. We also have to think about that in this context. So, and this is very important in the context of digital transformations. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much for Mr. Taniguchi. Are there another question from the audience?
One person raised hand, so I'm
Yes.
gonna allow. Yes.
Yes. It's a final, the question from the floor.
Can you hear me,
Okay.
Professor? Good evening, everyone. My name is Lak Song Ha, and currently I'm a master student at Kyoto University, and I belong to the Department of Civil and Earth Resources Engineering. And I have a question for Professor Nguyen from Vietnam, whose presentation is about the recycling of the CDW. So here's my question. So I understand that Vietnam is new to this kind of recycling of the CDW. And in your presentation, you have mentioned about the case of the illegal dumping of CDW. And it is obvious that this recycling program is require the cooperation from the construction company or the contractor. So can you tell us more of what kind of thing we can do to persuade the construction company to be more cooperative with this recycling of CDW program? Thank you. That's my question.
Okay. So, Professor Zhang.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shangha, for your question. Yeah, actually, the CDW in Vietnam that we're facing, first, the illegal dumping is a severe problem to make the big environmental impact for the society. Also, we consider this is a very good resources and we don't want to waste. We want to recycle to make the new materials. So, you're right that in order to implement this kind of activities, we need the construction companies to get involved with us. So first, we approach from the government policy. We are now working with the government first to issue the kind of circular. That is obligation that the companies, the owner, have to collect and also to recycle this CDW. So this kind of severe treatment punishment if the company will not do this activity and just dump illegally. So that is the policy. But we need to support them for technology and also especially guide them how to demolish. So we're working with the Ministry of Construction to prepare the guideline to help the companies know how to make the on-site sorting. So that will help them to save the time and also cost. And also we issue the national standard. So this material with this standard, they can be used in practical projects because normally in Vietnam, if the material that doesn't meet the standard cannot be sold for the practical projects. So we have to help them to issue the national standards. So they have the base on the strength of the material, so it can be applied in practical projects. And also we also help them to instruct what kind of projects can be used for CDW. For example, now we instruct them, for example, for using for base or sub-base, which can be used for large quantities of CDW. And also we add the value. So this can be used with higher price when they sell this kind of materials. And also as for the government, the government will issue the policy that limit the deportation, the use of the virgin materials. So natural material cannot be used now. And also we limit that in projects, at least 60% of the material must be used for recycled materials. So both policy and also standards, and we help the companies to implement that kind of things. And also, for example, like we also to carry out the, we work with the local government to make the planning, because we need the site for collecting and also for treatment, so the company can join. So the company, we support them with the tracking, supervision, or one of the technology that we are applying, so to use the IoT and so blockchain and so AI for management, from the demolition, for transportation, collection, and also for treatment. So that's we with technology, we work with the central government and also the regional government to have the company. So that's the complete process we call circular approach, that the company can also generate profit, and also the government also can supervise all of the process. So that is how we are now also working with the government and also supporting the construction companies. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. So we are enjoying the discussion and wish to continue this kind of the discussion. But I'm sorry that I don't have enough the time and need to stop this kind of discussion here now. So finally, my job is summarize this the roundtable meeting. So I have already I made some the PowerPoint. So please look at such kind of PowerPoint and finish the discussion. Oh. どこに行きましたか。ちょっと待ってください。あれ。
Just wait a minute. I'm going to show that my PowerPoint.
あれ、私のパワーポイントが見つからないです。
I cannot find out my PowerPoints. I'm sorry.
Sorry. ちょっと、wait a minute. Okay, it's okay. So finally, I give some comments. This roundtable meeting looks like not the the small table, because by using this kind the Zoom the system, it is possible to communicate a little bit the global, more global or wider the range. So that we can use such kind of the wider table to discuss this kind of the very important matter. And now I'm in Kyoto, and I'm join this kind the meeting from my house. So I did not use any transportation today. So some system will be changed because of this kind the COVID-19. But the civil engineer will continue to the progress to make some the new make a new technology or make a new the idea. But today I got a very the important the idea from the Professor Pacheco from Philippines. It is future literacy. Future literacy. It is a very important, the word. So the every civil people who related to the civil engineer have some, the mind to think some interdisciplinary, some interest in the interdisciplinary, the field, and some high level, the thinking way, and make a the future literacy, and not only the one country, maybe the collaborate to many the Asian country, and also the Oceania's the country. Today I'm very interested in, because about 40 years ago I travel around New Zealand by using a bicycle. Now is impossible. But the 40 years ago was possible. At that time, I look at the city area in Auckland or Wellington or Christchurch. But New Zealand have so many the rural area. But it is very the difficult to control or the maintain the high quality the infrastructure all around the the country. but our civil engineer make some future literacy and make a good, the infrastructure for the public people to keep their life or their, the good life or their dream or their future. So thank you very much for your attention. I wanted to close this meeting. I made the PowerPoint, but it is not impossible to use. But anyway, thank you very much for your attendance. About 200, the attendance join this, the things. So it is a strong power for the Zoom system. Thank you very much for your collaboration.